Guten Abend, liebes, sehr verehrtes, zahlreich und wirklich bis auf den letzten Platz und darüber hinaus erschienenes Publikum. Es ist mir eine sehr, sehr große Ehre und Freude, dass ich Sie durch die heutige Poetry Night führen darf. Mein Name ist Maren Jäger, ich bin Literaturwissenschaftlerin an der Humboldt-Universität und ich bin Lyrikkritikerin und ich bin aber vor allem eines, ich bin Leserin, emphatische Leserin, vor allem von Gedichten. Also wenn ich eine Visitenkarte hätte, dann würde wahrscheinlich Rezipientin darauf stehen. Diese Nacht werden Sie heute erleben als ein vierstimmiges Konzert. Gedichte aus 4 Ländern in 2 Sprachen. Und mitsamt den deutschen Übersetzungen, die Schauspielerin, Autorin und Musikerin Julia Malik und der Schauspieler, Dramaturg, Regisseur und Sprecher Frank Arnold vortragen werden. Ich werde im Anschluss an die 4 Lesungen je 2 bis 3, 4, vielleicht, eher 4 Fragen stellen an die Autorinnen und Autoren in der Reihenfolge Margaret Atwood, Charis Vlavianos, J. Bernard und Paul Muldoon. Und weil die Muttersprache von 3 der 4 Englisch ist und der 4., nämlich Charis Vlavianos, ganz exzellent Englisch spricht, wie Sie hören werden, und ich außerdem darauf spekuliere, dass Sie meinem Denglisch folgen können, I'll switch to English right now. In the background, you will see 4 photographs because we have asked the poets in advance to take a picture of or from their workplace, their writing scene, as it were, that we get an impression of their perspective, so to speak. Poems are harmless, said the poet Hans Till. One should have no illusions. Gedichte sind harmlos, man sollte sich keine Illusionen machen. Indeed, if poems could change the world, it would hardly be so out of joint today. In Margaret Atwood's poem, A Flame from Dearly, we read, "The world's burning up. It always did. Only now it's burning faster." But, so I hope, perhaps, poetry can still do a lot, and it is actually not that harmless. Poetry is and has always been an exercise in the use of freedom. Poems allow and use the greatest freedom in the smallest space, speaking all languages of the world and also all languages of emotion and imagination. A poem can be a precision instrument and an archive, a memory both for language and for history, a loosening exercise of ambiguity, a moment of pause, a space for breathing and for reflection. Margaret Atwood's poems demonstrate what poetry can do. Her poetry can make an invisible man visible. They can keep beautiful words alive, such as dearly or sorrow. They know the dreams of animals. They merge past and present in the here and now of the verses. And Margaret Atwood's poems even know how to fly inside your own body. And they know the secret of the siren song. You certainly know the Canadian author as one of the most important narrators of our times, the author of novels such as The Handmaid's Tale, Booker Prize winner both for The Blind and for The Testaments, and winner of the Peace Prize of the German book trade, Friedenspreis des deutschen Buchhandels, which was awarded to her in 2017. Those of you who have been to yesterday's event with Margaret Atwood and Claudia Rankin know that she just brought out a collection of essays and occasional pieces on burning questions, but she started out writing poetry. When her first book, Double Persephone, Jan Wagner just spoke about, that appeared in 1961 and won Canada's highest literary prize, a publisher called her to ask if she was planning a novel, only to learn that a complete manuscript had already been in the house for some time for review. So when Margaret Atwood was 30, her debut novel, The Edible Woman, was published. The first anthology of Margaret Atwood's poems a bilingual edition in English and German. Berlin Verlag 2020 brings together poems from 30 years. 9 translators have each been entrusted with poems from one volume. Anne Cotton, Ulrike Dresdner, Christian Philipps, Dagmara Kraus, Elisabeth Plessen, Kerstin Preivus, Monika Rink, Jan Wagner, and Alissa Walser. The poems you will hear today were first published in 1974 and 1981. The translations are by Alissa Walser and Jan Wagner. In Margaret Atwood's poems, you will rediscover her brilliant intellect and her wry humor, her political sensibility, her way of looking at the world with an alert awareness and a deep knowledge of human nature. But you will also find the world looking back. But hear it for yourself, and welcome with me, joined by Julia Malik, Margaret Atwood.
That's my photo. Thank you very much. It's wonderful to be here again. Isn't it nice that we are in person and not on a Zoom? I'll pay for it later, no doubt. So the first poem is called Siren Song, and it is a Greek motif. As you know, the sirens had a song and nobody knew what it said, except for Odysseus, of course, but he never told. Siren Song. This is the one song everyone would like to learn, the song that is irresistible, the song that forces men to leap overboard in squadrons, even though they see the beached skulls. The song nobody knows because anyone who has heard it is dead, and the others can't remember. Shall I tell you the secret? And if I do, will you get me out of this bird suit? I don't enjoy it here, squatting on this island, looking picturesque and mythical, with these 2 feathery maniacs. I don't enjoy singing this trio, fatal and valuable. I will tell the secret to you, only to you. Come closer. This song is a cry for help. Help me. Only you can. You are unique at last. Alas, it is a boring song, but it works every time.
Sirenengesang. Das ist genau der Gesang, den jeder gern lernte. Der Gesang, der unwiderstehlich ist, der die Männer zwingt, über Bord zu springen, in Geschwadern den offensichtlich gestrandeten Schädeln nach. Der Gesang, den keiner kennt, denn wer ihn auch hörte, ist tot. Und von den anderen erinnert sich keiner. Soll ich dir das Geheimnis verraten? Und wenn, wirst du mich dann aus diesem Vogel-Outfit befreien? Es ist kein Vergnügen, auf dieser Insel zu hocken, malerisch, mythisch auszuschauen. Mit diesen 2 gefiederten Irren kann ich es nicht genießen, ein effektiv tödliches Trio zu singen. Ich werde dir das Geheimnis verraten. Dir. Nur dir allein. Komm näher. Dieser Gesang ist ein Hilfeschrei. Hilf mir. Nur du. Du allein kannst es. Denn du bist endlich einzigartig. Leider ist es ein lahmes Lied, aber es wirkt allemal.
The moment. The moment when, after many years of hard work and a long voyage, you stand in the center of your room, house, half-acre, square mile, island, country, knowing at last how you got there, and say, I own this, is the same moment the trees unloose their soft arms from around you, the birds take back their language, the cliffs fissure and collapse, the air moves back from you like a wave, and you can't breathe. No, they whisper, you own nothing. You were a visitor time after time, climbing the hill, planting the flag, proclaiming, we never belonged to you. You never found us. It was always the other way round.
Der Augenblick, in dem du nach vielen Jahren harter Arbeit und einer langen Reise in der Mitte von deinem Zimmer stehst, dem Haus, halbe Morgen, Viertelmeile, Insel, Land, zumindest weißt, wie du hierher gekommen bist und sagst, dies ist mein Besitz, ist derselbe Augenblick, in dem die Bäume ihre weichen Arme lösen von dir, die Vögel ihre Sprache zurückerhalten, die Klippen rissig werden, einstürzen, die Luft sich als Welle von dir zurückzieht und du nicht atmen kannst. Nein, flüstern sie, du besitzt nichts. Du warst nur Besucherin, kamst immer wieder den Hügel herauf, hissest die Fahne, tatest kund. Wir haben dir niemals gehört. Du hast uns nie gefunden. Es war immer andersherum.
Red fox. The red fox crosses the ice, intent on none of my business. It's winter and slim pickings. I stand in the bushy cemetery pretending to watch birds, but really watching the fox who could care less. She pauses on the sheer glare of the pond. She knows I'm there, sniffs me in the wind at her shoulder. If I had a gun or dog or a raw heart, she'd smell it. She didn't get this smart for nothing. She's a lean vixen. I can see the ribs, the sly trickster's eyes filled with longing and desperation, the skinny feet adept at lies. Why encourage the notion of virtuous poverty? It's only an excuse for zero charity. Hunger corrupts, and absolute hunger corrupts absolutely, or almost. Of course, there are mothers squeezing their breasts dry, pawning their bodies, shedding teeth for their children, or that's our fond belief. But remember, Hansel and Gretel were dumped in the forest because their parents were starving. So, keeper, to survive, we'd all turn thief and rascal, or so says the fox, with her coat of an elegant scoundrel, her white knife of a smile, who knows just where she's going, to steal something that doesn't belong to her, some chicken or one more chance or other life.
Die Füchsin. Die Rotfüchsin läuft übers Eis, fixiert auf etwas, was mit mir nichts zu tun hat. Es ist Winter, das Angebot mager. Ich stehe auf dem buschigen Friedhof und tue so, als schaute ich Vögeln zu, beobachte aber in Wahrheit die Füchsin, der das vollkommen Schnuppe ist. Sie hält inne auf dem blanken Glanz des Teiches. Sie weiß, dass ich da bin, wittert mich im Wind an ihrer Schulter. Hätte ich ein Gewehr, einen Hund oder ein rohes Herz, sie räche es. Sie ist nicht umsonst so schlau geworden. Eine dürre Füchsin ist sie. Ich kann die Rippen sehen, die listigen Gauneraugen voll Verlangen und Verzweiflung, die dünnen Füße, geschickt im Lügen. Wozu den Irrglauben stärken? Es gäbe eine tugendhafte Armut. Das ist nichts als eine Ausrede für Nullbarmherzigkeit. Hunger macht ruchlos und vollkommener Hunger macht vollkommen ruchlos. Oder beinahe. Natürlich gibt es Mütter, die ihre Brüste auspressen, ihre Körper verpfänden, für ihre Kinder Zähne verlieren. So unsere naive Vorstellung. Aber vergesst nicht, Hänsel und Gretel wurden im Wald sitzen gelassen, weil ihre Eltern am Verhungern waren. Sauf qui peut, um zu überleben, würden wir alle zu Dieben. Und Lumpen, dies verrät uns die Füchsin mit dem Pelzmantel eines Edelhalunken und jenem weißen Messer von Lächeln, die ganz genau weiß, wo sie hingeht, etwas zu stehlen, was nicht ihr gehört. Irgendein Huhn, eine letzte Chance, ein anderes Leben.
Last poem, Morning in the Burned House. In the burned house, I am eating breakfast. You understand, there is no house, there is no breakfast, yet here I am. The spoon which was melted scrapes against the bowl, which was melted also. No one else is around. Where have they gone to, brother and sister, mother and father? Off along the shore, perhaps. Their clothes are still on the hangers, their dishes piled beside the sink, which is beside the wood stove with its grate and sooty kettle. Every detail clear, tin cup and rippled mirror. The day is bright and songless. The lake is blue, the forest watchful. In the east, a bank of cloud rises up silently like dark bread. I can see the swirls in the oilcloth. I can see the flaws in the glass, those flares where the sun hits them. I can't see my own arms and legs or know if this is a trap or blessing, finding myself back here where everything in this house has long been over, kettle and mirror, spoon and bowl, including my own body, including the body I had then, including the body I have now as I sit at this morning table, alone and happy, bare child's feet on the scorched floorboards I can almost see, in my burning clothes, the thin green shorts and grubby yellow t-shirt, holding my cindery, non-existent, radiant flesh, incandescent.
Ein Morgen im verbrannten Haus. Ich frühstücke im verbrannten Haus. Versteht mich recht, es gibt kein Haus, kein Frühstück. Und doch bin ich hier. Der Löffel, der geschmolzen ist, kratzt an der Schüssel, ebenfalls geschmolzen. Niemand ist da außer mir. Wohin sind sie gegangen? Bruder und Schwester? Mutter und Vater? Am Strand entlang vielleicht. Die Kleidung hängt noch auf den Bügeln. Ihr Geschirr türmt sich auf bei der Spüle, gleich neben dem Holzofen mit seinem Rost, dem rußigen Kessel. Jedes Detail ist ganz deutlich. Blechnapf und gewellter Spiegel. Der Tag ist strahlend und ohne Gesang. Der See ist blau, der Wald wachsam. Im Osten eine Wolkenwand, die lautlos aufgeht wie dunkles Brot. Ich kann die Wirbel im Wachstuch sehen. Ich kann die Bläschen im Glas sehen. Dieses Aufblitzen, wo das Sonnenlicht sie trifft. Meine eigenen Arme und Beine sehe ich nicht, weiß nicht, ob es Falle oder Segen ist, wieder hier zu sein, wo doch alles in diesem Haus schon lange vergangen ist. Kessel und Spiegel, Löffel und Schüssel und auch mein eigener Körper. Und auch der Körper, den ich damals hatte. Und auch der Körper, den ich jetzt habe, an diesem Tisch am Morgen, allein und glücklich. Die nackten Kinderfüße auf versenkten Dielen, ich kann sie fast sehen. In meiner brennenden Kleidung, den dünnen grünen Shorts und dem schmuddeligen gelben T-Shirt, um mein aschenes, nicht existierendes, leuchtendes Fleisch, weiß glühend.
In the poems by Margaret Atwood that are so good that for a while you might know that when reading poetry, the world just seems to tremble. For instance, where do the words go when we have said them? Or time smears our hands all right, we lick it off a windfall. But there are two words which I particularly love. They were in the poem you just read, Morning in the Burned House. It is this, you understand. You understand there is no house, which creates a shared perspective at the very beginning. What is it you would like us to understand, or you would wish us to understand when reading your poetry?
Wow.
Sorry.
I think that's kind of up to you.
Yeah.
So it's once you have published something, it is no longer in the hands of the writer. It is in the hands of the reader, and it is the reader that keeps the written word alive, because, of course, if nobody's reading it, it's just sitting on the page. And it's also true that every reader is different, and you never know what a reader is going to bring to any given text. So you can't really dictate to the reader.
Of course, you can't dictate, but you can try to do something with us. So what this poem particularly does is claiming something which is denied immediately afterwards, which I find so exciting, asserting that something is there, which is actually not there or no longer there. And I think we understand in the course of the poem, so that's an interesting movement you're following. But and what just came to me, perhaps there is a different kind of fiction a poem can create different from that prose could create.
Not sure. So? I think words create, words of any kind. It's just that they create in different ways, with different patterns and wavelengths, but you know, you can tell, and it happens all the time, because as we know, the internet is full of fictions.
Oh, yes.
So people are creating things with words that aren't true. So fiction does that, poetry does that, but there's a label. It's like the label on cigarettes, smoking may kill you. It says fiction. It says poetry. It's just that these other things are being presented as if they are true. Whereas we know when we are writing poetry or when we are reading a novel, this is a different sort of, it's a different level of story or word pattern. But language, of course, is the oldest and most powerful, completely human technology.
And I'm still keen on this particular technology of poetry because it has this very small space and it does something like what you would perhaps call a double exposure in photography in this poem. So in a way telescoping or merging different times. And I think this is a kind of, also a fiction which is nevertheless has a huge degree of truthfulness.
But we all do this.
Yeah.
And it's called remembering.
Okay.
So, but it depends how intensely you're remembering. So if you have a very clear memory of something, you're in a way back in that time.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is a memory. But and one totally different question concerning your writing life, although I read one of the essays where you wrote about that. When do you write poetry and when do you write prose? Do you have different times or spaces?
I wish I had a technique, I wish I had a pattern, I wish I had a method. But I'm too old to have gone to writing school, so I never knew that I was supposed to have those things. And,
it's not so much about a method, but do you feel this is a time or a place? Or
okay, I think the answer is whenever possible. So it depends on what else you're doing in the rest of your life. So if you have a day job, then of course you have to write in the evening or quite early in the morning if you're really disciplined, which I am not. So I did have one great job once where I could do the actual job quite fast and I could roll my novel into the typewriter and pretend to be working at the job. But actually I was actually typing my manuscript. So yeah, I would say whenever possible. And why is it mostly poetry in the 60s? And then novels after that. Well, for two reasons. It was easier to publish poetry for me in the 60s, but also I had jobs, or else I was a student, so it was harder to get the extended time that you need to really bash out a novel. And I think it's also a different function of the brain. So I think that novels are 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. You have to work at it. You might get the idea like that, but then you have to work it out. And poetry, which I think is closer to the brain function that has to do with music, poets are very annoying to other people because they don't look as if they're working. Whereas a novelist, very busy, you look as if you're working, people think she's working. But poets do spend a lot of time looking out the window. It's not convincing. They say, well, why don't you mow the lawn? I'm working. It's just not convincing. But it is true, and because my brother is a neurophysiologist, I had this idea that I was going to wire up some novelists, and I was going to wire up some poets, and I was going to look at their brain patterns. But unfortunately, although you can do this with a novelist, it's very hard to do it with a poet because you never know when they're going to be composing. And sometimes they just really are looking out the window. So I haven't yet been able to do that, but it's a good idea. You may have this idea. Yeah.
Okay, so remember, poets are not good for experiments with.
Well, you know this thing you wear for your heart, like 72 hours, so we could put something like that on the poets. Of course, it might inhibit them, don't you think? Yeah, probably.
In the book Dearly, there is a facsimile of a handwritten poem of yours in the front and in the back. Looks like this. And do you write the first drafts both of poems and novels by hand, or just poems?
Poems always.
Poems always.
Novelist, you know how when you're skiing you have to push off? Get going down the hill. So I push off with handwriting. But then, now that they've invented the computer, it used to be pretty bad because I can't touch type, so my typing was always very messy. But now, just for me, they've invented these computer programs that tell you when you have made a typo. Yeah, so they did that for me.
It's the same with me. We couldn't live without them. At times they're even cleverer than I am and tell me what I actually wanted to write. But
well, sometimes they're wrong, I have to tell you that. But yes, anyway, it's been very, very useful, and I can therefore sometimes actually write on the keyboard, whereas I couldn't do that on a manual typewriter.
I don't know if a manual typewriter is still an option for most of the people.
Well, I kept one just in case. You never know when the electricity is going to go off.
So, okay, keep your typewriters just in case. And let me ask you one last question. What is on your photograph? I mean snow, obviously, but where is the snow?
Well, I'm not going to tell you.
Oh.
Yes, it's one of my writing burrows, which I have a couple. So I was asked to give a photo of what I could see when I looked out the window. So that's something that I can see in possibly February or so. Okay. And that would be in, Canada's really big, so I can say Canada, but that won't be any help to you. It is in the part with trees. It's not in a city. And yeah, so that gives you a pretty good idea. So it narrows it down. Yeah, it's actually a very difficult driveway because in about March, the snow all melts and then it freezes. So it is sheer ice. And for that purpose, I have a sled. So if you can't get down with the car, you can get down with a sled. And if you can't get down with a sled, you can get down on skis on the snow part, pulling the sled on the part that isn't icy. This is just a Canadian problem. You don't need really to know about it. But that's what we do sometimes to get some isolation.
I can't help envying you a bit about this Canadian problem, and I thank you so much for being here in the name of everybody. In the preface to Dearly, Margaret Atwood writes, "Poetry deals with the core of human existence, life, death, renewal, change, as well as fairness and unfairness, injustice and sometimes justice, the world in all its variety, the weather, time, sadness, joy, and birds. There are more birds in these poems than there used to be. I wish for even more birds in the next book of poems, should there be one. And I wish also for more birds in the world. Let us all hope. Let us all hope, not for one, but for many more books of poetry by Margaret Atwood and many, many, many more birds in the world. Charis Vlavianos, epigrammatic short verses, they are surrounded by poetic space which they leave open to us also as a space of sound and reverberation to grasp the musicality of his verses. The poems are thinking text, as it were, that survey the realm, the fragile realm of words, as he himself puts it, and they raise questions rather than providing answers. Even his aphorisms and the aphorisms which are concealed in the verses, they are no know-it-alls, they don't speak ex cathedra, but they articulate uncertainties. But one thing he knows and says with certainty: nothing counts, only the quality of sensation will remain. And in one of his books, we find a motto by Fernando Pessoa: true art must be denationalized to the highest degree and concentrate all parts of the world within itself. And Charis Vlavianos also concentrates several parts of the world within himself. He was born in Rome to Greek parents, and he spent his early childhood in Italy. He later attended a school in Athens and spent lots of time in the holidays with his father in Rio de Janeiro. He now teaches philosophy, history, and the history of ideology at the American College of Greece in Athens. And he edits the literary journal Poetiki, Dichtung, poetry. And as he says, he speaks 4 languages, writes in 2 languages, but cries in 1. In his poems, you might hear echoes of different voices, ancient Greek, modern Greek voices, as well as American and English authors, for instance, Wallace Stevens or John Ashbery, to name only 2. And I think that his own poetic voice actually gains its contour just by, in this dialogue with those foreign voices. And he is a translator of works by Wallace Stevens and John Ashbery, but also by William Blake, by Zbigniew Herbert, by Carlo Galdoni, Emily Dickinson, T.S. Eliot, Louise Glick, and Anne Carson, to name only a few. Last night he spoke with Gregor Dotzauer about the art of translation. Apart from no less than, I think I counted 12 volumes of poetry, Charis has published essays, aphorism, and his poems have been translated into more than a dozen languages. And the first German translation appeared in 2001, Der Engel der Geschichte, a reference to Walter Benjamin, and Hansa in Munich published in 2007 the poetry collection Nach dem Ende der Schönheit, After the End of Beauty. The poems Charis will read tonight, as well as their translations, are taken both from the Hansa edition and from the comprehensive Romeosini volume, Urlaub in der Wirklichkeit und andere Gedichte, which I can absolutely recommend. And Charis will take turns with Frank Arnold, who will read the German translations by Dadi Sideri and Thorsten Israel. Welcome, Charis and Frank. The stage is yours. Some space for you. Sorry about
that. Well, thank you for the invitation. I was here 5 years ago, and Uli Schreiber gave me this as a present, which is that sign, and I haven't taken it off. It's in this suit since that time. So I'm very glad to be back. And you can never have enough of Berlin. I'm also very happy to be in the company of such esteemed writers. And in fact, you just mentioned that I edit this journal called Poetics. And in fact, in some of the issues of Poetics, I had translations of the poetry of Paul Muldoon, who is here today, and of Margaret Atwood. So it's a nice coincidence. You are missing, but I will fill that gap. So because, as you all say, it's all Greek to you, I've decided to read one poem in English for the benefit of my fellow writers who don't speak Greek, I assume. And then I'll read in Greek, and I'm very happy that you'll be reading, probably better than me, the German translations. Okay, well, when I was asked to send a picture, I was in my summer house in Tinos. That doesn't mean that I see this picture every day of my life. But you can see the island, Syros, and on the left is this sacred island of Delos. And in fact, Tinos is in a group of islands called the Cyclades, because Delos was at the center, and it's from the word kyklos, cycle. And perhaps those of you who've done some philosophy know that Socrates was not executed immediately because the sacred boat from Athens was at Delos, and no executions took place when the boat was there. So he lived a few more days, and that's why we have that dialogue, Crito, where his student wants Socrates to escape, and he doesn't because he's a good Athenian. Of course, Aristotle said that he would escape because he didn't want the Athenians to commit a second crime and kill another philosopher. Okay, so this is the view. That doesn't mean that when I see the sea, I always write poetry about the seaside. But the poem I'm going to read to you now, the English one, in fact, I did write it at the time when I was building the house in Tinos. So it's called Autumnal Refrain. When the last leaves have fallen, we shall return at last to a familiar, intimate place, to this cherished sanctuary our fatigued body has left unfulfilled for the necessities of inevitable knowledge. It is difficult, almost impossible, to choose even the adjective that would lend some meaning to this bare coldness, this causeless grief that spreads gradually, steadily, eroding your life's innermost recesses. A simple natural gesture might be the first step, the beginning of a new attempt. If not now, not today, tomorrow, without fail. Lack of imagination, that too will have to be invented naturally, and the stage will be set as the instructions on the paper demand. The stone house must be kept erect. The arch in the front room, your precious, priceless past, especially this. And the old lintel with the mermaid, and the fig tree in the garden, and the oleanders, and the dry stone wall, all must remain. All. That the ruin, the rift, the absence may be revealed. That the strife, the fall, the work may be appraised. The autumnal wind that gave these words their body, fiercely effacing their metaphysical gleam, knows all too well the secret they conceal, as do you, who stoop to lift a dry leaf from your doorstep, the leaf of reality, the exquisite poem of the genuine.
Herbstlicher Refrain. Wenn auch die letzten Blätter gefallen sind, werden wir endlich in unseren bekannten, vertrauten Raum zurückkehren, diesen wertvollen Zufluchtsort, den der erschöpfte Körper nicht vollenden konnte, für den Bedarf an unvermeidlichem Wissen. Es ist schwer, fast unmöglich, auch nur das Adjektiv auszusuchen, das dieser leeren Kälte einen gewissen Sinn gebe, der grundlosen Traurigkeit, die sich langsam, aber ständig ausbreitet und die heimlichsten Mulden deines Lebens zersetzt. Eine einfache, natürliche Geste wäre vielleicht der erste Schritt, der Anfang eines neuen Versuchs. Wenn nicht jetzt, wenn nicht heute, morgen auf jeden Fall. Der Mangel an Fantasie? Auch diese muss sicher erdacht werden und die Szenerie so errichtet werden, wie es die Anweisungen auf dem Papier bestimmen. Das Steinhaus muss erhalten bleiben. Der Bogen im Vorderraum, deine teure, kostbare Vergangenheit, vor allem das. Und der alte Türsturz mit der Seejungfrau. Und der Feigenbaum im Garten und der Oleander und die Trockenmauer. Alles muss bleiben. Alles. Dass der Verfall zum Vorschein kommt, der Bruch, die Abwesenheit. Dass die Mühe geachtet wird, das Scheitern, das Werk. Der Herbstwind, der diesen Worten einen Sinn gab und ihren metaphysischen Glanz gewaltsam löschte, kennt sehr gut das Geheimnis, das sie verbergen. Du übrigens auch, der sich bückt, um ein trockenes Blatt vom Treppenabsatz aufzuheben. Das Blatt der Wirklichkeit, das vortreffliche Gedicht des Wahren.
I told you that he's going to read better than me. That's the proof. Now, I'm going to read in Greek, so I know that most of you have been to Greece, so you may recognize some words. There's no kalimera, souvlaki, moussaka in my poems. You might recognize some words, not least. Okay. Εν θριάμβο. Ένα λεπτό χάρτινο πέπλο προστατεύει αυτό το φωτογενές απόγευμα, λησμονημένο πια από όλους και από τα πρόσωπα ακόμη που εικονίζονται στην πολύτιμη για μας φωτογραφία. Το ένα, αυτό με το αφελές μηδίαμα, από καιρό νεκρό, υπέκυψε, όπως όριζε το φίλο του, στη γοητεία του εαυτού του. Το άλλο συνεχίζει να υπάρχει, βυθισμένο στη λευκότητα της ανιστερόβουλης σιωπής του, στην ουσία ένα δυσδιάστατο είδωλο που παρισφραίει στον ηρικό πρότυπο της μνήμης. Αν μπορούσες να ανακαλέσεις τη στιγμή που τα δύο ερωτευμένα πρόσωπα, μια και τι άλλο μπορεί να σημαίνει αυτός ο οπτικός αναγκαλισμός, θυσίασαν την τριφυλή τους αθανασία στη βουλημία του φακού, το δευτερόλεπτο εκείνο που το λύγισμα του χεριού ή το χαμήλωμα του βλέμματος υπαγόρευε στην αιωνιότητα μιας πόζας την ιστορία του κοινού τους παρελθόντος, ίσως να έβρισκες τις λέξεις που ενωματώνουν αυτή την αχνή διαβεβαίωση, πως μια ζωή στυλπνή, βαλσαμωμένη, είναι ικανή να διαιωνίσει το πάθος αυτό στον αναστεναγμό του τώρα, στη λάμψη που με φυλακίζει για πάντα στα μάτια σου, αγάπη μου.
Im Triumph. Ein feiner Schleier aus Papier schützt diesen photogenen Nachmittag, der nun von allen vergessen ist. Selbst von den Personen, die abgebildet sind auf der für uns kostbaren Fotografie. Die eine, jene mit dem unbefangenen Lächeln, tot seit langem, erlag ihrem eigenen Zauber, so wie es ihr Geschlecht bestimmte. Die andere setzt ihre Existenz fort, versunken in das Weiß ihres unrachsüchtigen Schweigens. Im Wesentlichen ein zweidimensionaler Schatten, der einsickert in die träumerische Grundform der Erinnerung. Wenn du den Moment zurückrufen könntest, in dem die beiden verliebten Personen, denn was sonst kann sie bedeuten, diese optische Umarmung, ihre schwelgerische Unsterblichkeit, der Gefräßigkeit des Objektivs opferten. Jene Sekunde, in dem die Beugung des Arms oder das Senken des Blicks die Geschichte ihrer gemeinsamen Vergangenheit einschrieb in die Ewigkeit einer Pose, würdest du vielleicht die Worte finden, die dieser arglosen Beteuerung Sinn verliehen, dass ein strahlendes, balsamiertes Leben fähig sei, diese Leidenschaft zu verewigen im Seufzer des Jetzt. in dem Glanz, der mich für immer fesselt an deine Augen, mein Liebling.
This poem begins with two lines. You know, sometimes, because we're talking about poetic inspiration, sometimes inspiration comes from the most bizarre places. I was in a taxi in Athens, and in the past, taxis were like minibuses. The taxi driver, perhaps you had that experience, takes other people in the taxi as well. So I was sitting in the back, and this man was sitting in the front who probably had a really bad day. He wasn't that well off. And suddenly, as we're crossing the street, in front of us came in, those cars, long ones, black ones that carry a coffin. So the guy in front of me said something which is pretty typical. He said, how lucky this guy, the dead man. No debts anymore, no payments, nothing, which was something to be expected. And then, but a minute later, he turned around and said to me, how wonderful life would have been if we were not forced to live it. Which I thought, what a wonderful line. And then he turned around and began to discuss some kind of, about some football team or something. And so, sometimes people say beautiful lines, beautiful kind of phrases. They're not aware, actually, of how beautiful they are. But if you are a writer and you have your antenna up, perhaps you can pick up that phrase and then put it in another kind of context. So this is how this poem begins. De imagine mundi. Πόσο όμορφη, πόσο ανέλπιστα γλυκιά θα ήταν η ζωή, αν δεν ήμασταν υποχρεωμένοι να τη ζήσουμε. Όμως κάποτε τα πράγματα ήταν διαφορετικά. Τα μηνύματα που έφερναν οι εποχές ήταν μέρος μιας απόλυτης αλήθειας. Τα βλέμματα, οι χειρονομίες, οι ασήμαντες κουβέντες σήμαιναν κάτι. Οι τυχαίες ενδείξεις επιβεβαίωναν και αυτές με την κρυφή τους έπαρση πως ο έρωτας είναι κάτι περισσότερο από ένα παιχνίδι απαντοχής. Ένας καθαρός ουρανός ή ένας ωραίος άντρας σκυμμένος πάνω σε ένα χειρόγραφο, μεταφορές που επινοήθηκαν για να μας περιέχουν, δεν μπορούν να διατηρήσουν στη μνήμη μου το πρόσωπό σου, να χρωματίσουν τον χαρτογραφημένο χώρο με την ακρίβεια που η σκιά αυτής της ανάμνησης επιβάλλει. Ζητάω περισσότερα, πολύ περισσότερα. Ένα ζωντανό πλαίσιο που να μπορεί να με δεχτεί. Μια πυκνότητα φωτός που να αποκαλύπτει τις πραγματικές δυνατότητες της φαντασίας. Ένα συγκεκριμένο λόγο που η προσταγή της λεπτότητάς του να δώσει σε αυτό το θάμβος το βάθος της δικής σου ομορφιάς. Ποια δύναμη θα αναχαιτήσει τον καλπασμό του παραμορφωμένου ονείρου που χάνεται στον ορίζοντα. Ποια θέληση θα ερμηνεύσει αυτή την αποφασιστική χειρονομία που τίποτα δεν ερμηνεύει. Η μέρα φτάνει στο τέλος της. Πρέπει να μείνουμε εδώ. Μέσα σε αυτό το ασημένιο θάμπομα εδραιώνεται η ψυχή.
De imagine mundi für John Ashbery. Wie schön, wie unverhofft süß wäre das Leben, wenn wir nicht gezwungen wären, es zu leben. Doch irgendwann lagen die Dinge anders. Die Botschaften, die die Jahreszeiten brachten, waren Teil einer absoluten Wahrheit. Die Blicke, die Gesten, die bedeutungslosen Worte bedeuteten etwas. Und auch die zufälligen Indizien bestätigten mit ihrem verborgenen Hochmut, dass die Liebe etwas mehr ist als ein verheißungsvolles Spiel. Ein klarer Himmel oder ein schöner Mann, der sich über ein Manuskript beugt, Metaphern erdacht, auf das sie uns umfassen, vermögen dein Gesicht nicht in meinem Gedächtnis festzuhalten. Den kartografierten Raum zu kolorieren mit der Genauigkeit, die der Schatten dieser Erinnerung einfordert. Ich verlange mehr, viel mehr. Einen lebendigen Rahmen, der mich aufzunehmen vermag. Eine Dichte des Lichts, die die wirklichen Möglichkeiten der Fantasie aufdeckt. Eine bestimmte Sprache, die mit dem Gebot ihrer Feinheit diesem Glanz die Tiefe deiner eigenen Schönheit gibt. Ethische Ordnung?
Ja.
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 Czerniawski.
It's nice actually to get an applaud when you read to an audience that doesn't understand Greek. And sometimes it's bigger than you actually get in Greece from readers who understand Greek. So it's nice. Η ηθική τάξη του έναστρου ουρανού στο βλέμμα σου, με τον τρόπο του Τσερνιάβσκι. Στέκει μόνο στην άκρη του δρόμου και παρατηρεί. Ο ήλιος λιώνει το χιόνι στο ασημένιο καπό ενός Ρενό. Μια γάτα χουζουρεύει στην εξώπορτα του σπιτιού, αριθμό 45. Μια νεαρή γυναίκα προσπαθεί να ανεβάσει το καρότσι με τα ψώνια στο πεζοδρόμιο. Πίσω της ένας γέρος κραδένει ένα πλακάτ που γράφει «Φάγομεν και πίωμεν, αύριο γάρ αποθνίσκομεν». Δεν θα μπορούσε να έχει δει τη σκηνή αυτή αν στις 17 Δεκεμβρίου ο καιρός δεν είχε ξαφνικά επιδεινωθεί. Αν το αεροπλάνο από τη Ρώμη δεν είχε προσγειωθεί με καθυστέρηση. Αν είχε αναχωρήσει μισή ώρα νωρίτερα από το σπίτι του, όπως είχε αρχικά σχεδιάσει. Και ίσως στη στιγμή εκείνη, η γάτα, η γυναίκα, ο γέρος, να μην βρίσκονταν στο συγκεκριμένο σημείο και ο ίδιος να στεκόταν κάπου αλλού, απέναντί της, μετρώντας τις τελευταίες νυφάδες να σκεπάζουν αργά-αργά τα μαλλιά της. Ήρθε η ώρα να επιστρέψει.
Die ethische Ordnung des gestirnten Himmels in deinem Blick, in der Art von Czerniawski. Er steht allein am Straßenrand und sieht, die Sonne schmilzt in Schnee auf der silbernen Motorhaube eines Renault. Eine Katze döst vor der Eingangstür von Haus Nummer 45. Eine junge Frau versucht, ihren Einkaufstrolley auf den Bürgersteig zu ziehen. Hinter ihr wedelt ein Greis mit einem Schild, auf dem steht: Lasset uns essen und trinken, denn morgen sind wir tot. Er hätte diese Szene nicht sehen können, wenn sich das Wetter am 17. Dezember nicht plötzlich verschlechtert hätte, wenn das Flugzeug aus Rom nicht mit Verspätung gelandet wäre, wenn er eine halbe Stunde früher von seiner Wohnung aufgebrochen wäre, so wie ursprünglich geplant. Und vielleicht befänden sich dann in diesem Moment die Katze, die Frau, der Greis nicht an eben diesem Punkt. Und er selbst stünde anderswo, ihr gegenüber, und zählte die letzten Schneeflocken, wie sie ganz langsam ihr Haar bedecken. Zeit, dass er zurückkehrt.
Okay, the last one, a very short one. Διακοπές στην πραγματικότητα. Να μπορούσες να χαθείς έστω και για λίγο στα ερείπια του χρόνου, όπως χάνεται κανείς στους δρόμους μιας νέας πομπίας, να ξεχάσεις το σημείο που στέκεσαι, το σταθερό αμετάβλητο κέντρο σου, να υψώσεις τα μάτια στον ουρανό, να δεις ένα αστέρι να πέφτει. Να το, κοίτα. Ποιο, πού?
Urlaub in der Wirklichkeit. Dass du dich verlieren könntest, wenigstens kurz in den Ruinen der Zeit, so wie man sich in den Straßen eines neuen Pompeji verliert, den Punkt zu vergessen, an dem du stehst, deine feste, unwandelbare Mitte, die Augen zum Himmel zu erheben, einen Stern fallen zu sehen. Dort, schau! Welcher? Oh.
You know, Haris, actually, it's like that. The very moment you read, we all understand Greece. We just forget it the second afterwards. The poem die ethische Ordnung des gestirnten Himmels in deinem Blick. Czerniawski, you know what it seems to me quite characteristic of your poetry because it combines seemingly different things, like the private, the sensual on the one hand. The title already does, with the cosmic, the philosophical, the ethical order. One, in a way, mirrors the other. Would that be, I don't want to say the essence, or is it in a way characteristic for your poetry, or for your poetic antennas, or your view on the world as well?
I think that all poets, or writers, not just poets, at the end of the day, what they put in their text, what they write, is the way they look at the world. It's kind of, their view of things at that specific moment. And that view also includes your ethical stance, your aesthetic stance, everything, your political stance, but also, most importantly, language. I mean, how do you, use language at that specific moment? We don't use language all the time from when we start writing. I mean, as you grow older, writing becomes more and more difficult. So,
Because your relationship with language becomes more difficult, or
no, because words are not, they don't come as easily, or you don't actually somehow use language in a kind of easy way, flimsy way. So I think, because I remember a few years ago, I was giving a reading in Thessaloniki, and at the end of the reading, this woman said to me, "Oh, how fortunate you are that you can write so easily." And I said, "Oh, it's the opposite. For a writer, writing is very, very difficult. It's not easy at all." So words, they don't surrender themselves to you as easily as when you're younger. I mean, when you're younger, you have less you're more relaxed about language. But then, as you grow older, it's more difficult.
Yeah, it perhaps has also something to do with entering into a huge poetic cosmos of which you just begin to grasp the true dimension.
I think probably you're more aware of the violence of language and how language somehow erases a great part of experience. In other words, you're trying to put on the page something, but what you find as you go on is that a great part of that is not actually doesn't come out in the page. So when you read the poem, I think what you're really reading is the words that have survived. And that's why it's very important to look at the white space, around the poem, because this is, it's full of dead words. I mean, all the words that didn't actually come up. So it's this kind of constant struggle of what actually survives. And it's not just experience. I mean, it's not that experience comes out on the page, but sometimes there's also the experience of the experience, how things have sink into you, and then you try to bring them out again. And there is this constant struggle, as I said, with language. So at the end, we should be very happy when you actually finish a poem that you manage, that some words have been able to survive.
Yeah. And I think the white spaces around the verses are more than just a symmetry for dead words, but I think gaps, ruptures, splinters, fragments have an important word to say in your poetry. You once wrote, "Because my life is a half-finished poem full of gaps which I try in vain to complete." That's one of the answers to the question why I write poetry, which you asked yourself and wrote a book about it, aphorisms. So which role do the gaps play less in your life than in your poetry?
Well, first of all, I mean, we spoke about the violence of language. But when you write, because Margaret Atwood talked about memory, you're trying to save things. Well, one problem with memory is what exactly do you remember? I mean, sometimes we remember what we wish to remember, or sometimes we see, for example, photographs of ourselves and our family, the past, and you think that you have lived that, but basically you haven't. It's because we're different human beings as we move on. So memory is very tricky. And then, as I said, language is very tricky. So, you know, we have all these games that memory and language play on you. And sometimes, you know, in poetry, you can, because it's not a like fiction narrative. In poetry, that kind of problem you have with memory and language can be crystallized into the text. And I think that gaps and the way we break the line sometimes reflect that difficulty. So I think that in a way, you know, as Atwood said, when we're looking at the window sometimes, I think we're thinking of exactly that. I mean, how you can't close the gaps, but I mean, some of them you can close. But other gaps, we leave them open because we want to be honest with, as I said, with what we can actually express at the end of the day. We cannot express everything. A lot of things, remains inside.
Yeah, I think let's leave it here. Thank you so much, Charles Vlavianos.
I leave the room now.
You leave the room now.
Shall I stay here or shall I go?
You can do whatever you want. I would like you to stay.
Can I stay here?
You can, sure. Okay. I have to start the second half of tonight with a confession, because very rarely has a book of poetry impressed me so deeply and painfully moved like this one. It's J. Bernard's first collection of poetry, Search. In German, that would be Schwall or Stromstoß, or also, as Anne Cotton beautifully translates, Brandung. Brandung is a German word which sounds both of a rush of water and fire, because it has Brand in it. Search was first published in 2019. It won the 2020 Sunday Times Young Writer of the Year award, and J. Bernard received the 2017 Ted Hughes Award for New Poetry for the multimedia performance work Search Side A. Jay grew up in Croydon, a South London suburb, and studied English at Oxford University. Their work crosses genres, media, themes, and also time. They are a poet, a graphic illustrator, a theatre maker, a film programmer at the British Film Institute's Flare, London's LGBTQIA+ film festival. She wrote poetic pamphlets, for instance, and their key issue that unifies their multifaceted and multimedia, even I would say holistic approach to art is politics in the broadest sense of the word, both personal and politic and public, from racial injustice to black queer politics, from family relationships to state surveillance. And the foreword of Search reminds us of January the 18th in 1981, when a fire broke out at 439 New Cross Road. It was Yvonne Ruddock's 16th birthday, and she had arranged a party with her cousin to celebrate. The fire spread quickly, killing 13 young people and injuring 27 others. The cause of the fire was never properly investigated. In 2016, Jay researched the archives of the George Padmore Institute in North London for the backgrounds of the New Cross fire, and subsequently also the Grenfell Tower tragedy, the Windrush scandal, and the Brexit. And well, this is research in the most emphatic sense of the word, not only searching an archive for documents, but also exploring the tension between private and public truth, questions of origin, questions of belonging, questions of national, local, ethnic identities. The poems gathered in Search are based on archive work, and they are little archives themselves, time capsules, as it were. And they speak not in abstract tones, and they are small and very, very powerful, poetic memories. They speak in voices and giving voices back to the victims in an extraordinary richness of forms, of sounds and rhythms. And Jay, in a way, pulls out the stops. They do everything with language that's actually possible, with language, with meter, with musicality to the maximum. But I would like you to hear for yourself. The translation is by Anne Cotton. And Jay will read one poem, and of that poem, Anne has made 2 different translations. I think we will speak about that later in the Q&A section. One is rather an interlinear version, which Julia will read first, and the other one is more experimental, trying to grasp the specific qualities of the texts, and I think we have something to talk about later. But now let us welcome Jay Bernard. No. Try again.
Now you can hear me?
Yeah. Okay.
It's the on switch helps. Thank you so much for that lovely introduction. As Maren said, these poems come from 1981, The New Crossfire, which was also a catalyst for what is now known as a sort of Black British identity. It already existed, but that was the moment where, as one of the activists said, the buck stops here in terms of the sort of colonial and oppressive attitudes of Britain at the time. One of the things that I looked at when I was writing this was the transcripts. So this first poem takes from the actual statements that were given, and I kind of reinvent them and reimagine those statements. And then the second poem will be, have the double translation, comes from a certain kind of nursery rhyme / carnival music / freestyle, and you'll hear both. Plus, the officer said, "Oh, it's very common for culprits to go missing." I said, "My son isn't a culprit, and how dare he imply it?" And one of the officers stood up by the window and looked out. He didn't want to look us full in the eye. He made it clear from the moment he set foot in the house, the moment he set foot, what he thought of us. And when they came back a few days later, I think the Tuesday, they said, "What were you wearing on the night of the fire?" I said, probably your new trousers. And he said, "Were you wearing a yellow shirt?" I said, "Yes." "Brown shoes?" I said, "Yes." And he took the items from a plastic bag. He took your things from a plastic bag, and he says, "Does this look like it? Does this look like it belongs to you?" I says, "Yes." And he says, "Do you recognize this key?" I said, "Why don't we try it?" And we struggled, and it fit. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." So I said, "What are you sorry for?" "I want to see my son." Stammer. They say that they don't think it's a good idea. I said, "I am your father." I said, "I am your father. I want to see you." They led us down to a room, and on the table, there you was. No face, nothing to speak of. I said, "This is the body where you found the clothes?" Nod. So I said, "It must be you. This must be my son." "You came, Dad." I'd been lying there all night and I couldn't move. I opened my eyes and I was in the house and everything was black, Dad. I'd been at the party a few hours and I didn't know about anything. What happened, Dad? And I felt someone touch me, but I was stiff, Dad. I've never been so stiff before. I tried to say, it's me, it's me. But they were looking at me so strangely, Dad. Like he couldn't stand to look at me, couldn't stand the sight of me. Police always looked at me like that. And he turned me over, and he took the shirt from under me, and they wrapped me in a blanket and drove me here. And I was lying there waiting for you, Dad. Across the table there were bodies, Dad, twisted, Dad, no heads like screaming branches of a tree, Dad, loads of them, I swear, and I heard them say, they were saying. And then you came. And I was calling out to you, Dad, and I know you heard me because here we are. Come back. Don't bury me. I can't stand it. I can barely stand it when the lights go off and I'm here and I spend the whole night listening for you, Dad. I want to crawl between Mum and you, in your bed, in your sheets, Dad. That's the only kind of burying I want.
Der Diensthabende so. Wissen Sie, es passiert sehr häufig, dass Täter verschwinden. Ich so. Mein Sohn ist kein Täter. Lassen Sie es nicht so klingen. Einer der Diensthabenden stellte sich zum Fenster hin und schaute hinaus. Wollte uns nicht ins Gesicht sehen. Der machte sehr deutlich, vom Augenblick an, als er die Wohnung betrat, sobald er die Wohnung betrat, was er von uns hielt. Und als er ein paar Tage später wiederkam, ich glaube, es war der Dienstag, sagten sie, was hatte er an in der Nacht, als es brannte? Ich sagte, wahrscheinlich deine neuen Hosen. Und er sagte, hatte er ein gelbes Oberteil an? Ja, sagte ich. Braune Schuhe? Ja, sagte ich. Und er holte die Gegenstände aus einer Plastiktüte. Er holte deine Sachen aus einer Plastiktüte und sagte, so ungefähr? Sieht das nach seinen Sachen aus? Ich so, ja. Und er so, erkennen Sie diesen Schlüssel? Ich so, probieren wir ihn. Und wir bemühten uns. Und er passte. Es tut mir leid, es tut mir so leid. Also sagte ich so, was tut Ihnen leid? Ich will meinen Sohn sehen. Stammel, Sie denken, es wäre keine gute Idee. Ich bin ein Vater, sagte ich. Ich bin ein Vater. Dein Vater. Ich will dich sehen. Sie führten uns zu einem Raum und auf dem Tisch warst du. Kein Gesicht, nichts Erkennbares. Ich sagte, an diesem Körper haben Sie die Kleider gefunden? Nicken. Also sagte ich, das musst du sein. Das muss mein Sohn sein. Du bist gekommen, Paps. Ich lag da schon die ganze Nacht und ich konnte mich nicht bewegen. Ich habe die Augen aufgemacht und ich war im Haus und alles war schwarz, Paps. Ich war ein paar Stunden auf der Party gewesen und wusste überhaupt nichts darüber, was passiert, Paps. Jemand hat mich berührt, ich habe es gespürt, Paps. Ich war ganz steif. So steif war ich noch nie im Leben. Ich versuchte zu sagen, ich bin's. Aber sie sahen mich so komisch an, Paps, als ob er es nicht aushalten würde, mich anzuschauen, meinen Anblick nicht ertragen würde. Bullen schauen mich immer so an. Und er hat mich umgedreht und das Oberteil genommen, das unter mir lag, und haben mich in eine Decke gewickelt und mich hierher gefahren. Und da lag ich und wartete auf dich, Paps. Über dem Tisch hing Körper, Paps. Verdreht, Paps, keine Köpfe. Wie schreiende Äste von Bäumen, ganz viele. extrem viele, ich schwöre. Und ich hörte, wie sie sagten, und dann bist du gekommen. Und ich habe nach dir gerufen, Paps. Und ich weiß, dass du mich gehört hast, weil jetzt sind wir hier, Paps. Komm zurück. Tu mich nicht unter der Erde begraben. Das halte ich nicht aus. Ich halte es kaum aus, wenn das Licht ausgeht. Und ich bin hier. Und die ganze Nacht lang nach dir lausche, Paps. Ich will zwischen dich und Mami hineinkriechen. In euer Bett, in eure Laken, Paps. Kein anderes Begräbnis will ich.
Me say ah. Me say ah. Me say one step forward and a 2 step back. Me say 3 step forward and a 6 step back. Me say 4 step forward and a 1 step back. Me say 1 half forward and a 1 half back. Me say left side forward and me right side back. Boss up left side, right side, happy change tack. Me say half the revolution, they pan the attack. Only half a solution to the things them we lack. Me say gal love reggae and gal love move. Boy love reggae and them love up him groove. The two of them are roll up and starting to move. Crowd gone quiet, people stop yum them food. And I'm watching them see this wicked MC, this beautiful gal all dressed up in green. Nails done nice, hair crisp, what you mean? The baddest little gal them ever did see. Me say 1 step forward and a 2 step back. Me say 3 step forward and a 6 step back. Me say 4 step forward and a 1 step back. Me say 1 half forward and a 1 half back. Me say the heat of the night, come up through the floor. Black smoke arise, them never did know. The music a jam and the young man a chat. Word fly from him lip like vampire bat. And the girl them a dance and the man them a rock. Drink 6 rum and black and the beat them a drop. Dark did descend and the room gone black. Voices a call, say them half get out. Voices a call, say them half get out. Screaming begin and the people a show. Me say screaming begin and the people a show. Them a cover them head and a cover them mouth. Me say 2 step forward and a 2 step back. Me say 3 step forward and a 6 step back. Me say 4 step forward and a 1 step back. Me say 1 half forward and a 1 half back. Down upon the street you see picnic face down. Biddy fly through the air and mash up on the ground. Flames them a fly and a furious red. Boy fall from the window and you no say him dead. Girl fall back inside, we no see her no more. No bright green dress up on the 3rd floor. Policeman come and fireman too. Them startled, them scared, them not know what to do. Mother she a cry and she not have no shoes. Man them a look but to help them refuse. Friend them shot by the scale of their loss. Black smoke a bellow down there in the cross. Me say black smoke a bellow at the house in the cross. Me say black smoke a bellow at the house in the cross. Me say blood a go run for the pain of the loss. Me say black smoke a bellow at the house in the cross. Me say left side forward and me right side back. Bust up left side, right side, happy change time. Me say half the revolution, the pan the attack. Only half a solution to the things them will not. Me say 2 step forward and a 2 step back. Me say 3 step forward and a 6 step back. Me say 4 step forward and a 1 step back. Me say 1 half forward and a 1 half back.
Liederbuch Version 2. Ich sage 1 Schritt vorwärts und 2 Schritte zurück. Ich sage 3 Schritte vorwärts und 6 Schritte zurück. Ich sage 4 Schritte vorwärts und einen Schritt zurück. Ich sage einen halben vorwärts und einen halben zurück. Ich sage linke Seite vor und meine rechte Seite zurück. Die linke Seite explodiert, rechte Seite muss sich die Taktik ändern. Ich sage, die halbe Revolution ist zum Angriff versammelt, aber nur eine halbe Lösung für alles, was uns fehlt. Ich sage, ein Mädchen liebt den Reggae und bewegt sich gern. Ein Junge liebt den Reggae und sein Tanzstil wird erotischer. Die beiden nähern sich an und beginnen sich gemeinsam zu bewegen. Die Menge ist still, Leute hören auf zu essen und sehen zu und haben nur mehr Augen für den hinreißenden MC. Das schöne Mädchen, sie ist ganz in grün gekleidet, die Nägel frisch gemacht, die Haare tight, da kann man nichts sagen. Das hinreißendste junge Mädchen, das man sich nur vorstellen kann. Ich sage 1 Schritt vorwärts und 2 Schritte zurück. Ich sage 3 Schritte vorwärts und 6 Schritte zurück. Ich sage 4 Schritte vorwärts und 1 Schritt zurück. Ich sage einen halben vorwärts und einen halben zurück. Ich sage, die Hitze der Nacht kam durch den Boden herauf. Schwarzer Rauch stieg auf, obwohl niemand es bemerkte. Die Musik spielte und die jungen Männer plauderten. Die Worte flogen von ihren Lippen wie Vampirfledermäuse. Und die Mädchen tanzten und die Männer wippten, tranken 6 Cuba Libre und fingen zum Beatboxen an. Es wurde dunkel und der Raum war finster. Stimmen riefen, dass man hinaus müsste. Stimmen riefen, dass man hinaus müsse. Es erhob sich ein Gekreische und die Leute schrien. Ich sage, ein Gekreische erhob sich und die Leute schrien. Sie bedeckten den Kopf und den Mund. Ich sage 2 Schritte vorwärts und 2 Schritte zurück. Ich sage 3 Schritte vorwärts und 6 Schritte zurück. Ich sage 4 Schritte vorwärts und 1 Schritt zurück. Ich sage einen halben vorwärts und einen halben zurück. Unten auf der Straße sieht man einen Körper mit dem Gesicht nach unten. Ein Kind fliegt durch die Luft und landet in einem Haufen auf dem Boden. Flammen fliegen durch die Luft, da ist ein furioses Rot. Ein Junge fliegt aus dem Fenster und man kann sich schon ausmalen, dass er tot ist. Ein Mädchen fällt wieder ins Innere zurück und man sieht sie nicht mehr. Kein grünes Kleid mehr erscheint im 3. Stock. Polizei und Feuerwehr kommen. Sie sind verschreckt, verängstigt und ratlos. Eine Mutter weint und hat keine Schuhe an. Ein Mann schaut, aber bietet keine Hilfe an. Freunde sind im Schock über das Ausmaß des Verlusts. Schwarzer Rauch steigt in Schwaden auf über New Cross. Ich sage, schwarzer Rauch steigt in Schwaden auf vom Haus in New Cross. Ich sage, schwarzer Rauch steigt in Schwaden auf vom Haus in New Cross. Ich sage, Blut und ich muss weglaufen aus Schmerz über den Verlust. Ich sage, schwarzer Rauch steigt in Schwaden auf vom Haus in New Cross. Ich sage, linke Seite vor und meine rechte Seite zurück. Die linke Seite explodiert, rechte Seite muss sich die Taktik ändern. Ich sage, die halbe Revolution ist zum Angriff versammelt, aber nur eine halbe Lösung für alles, was uns fehlt. Ich sage 2 Schritte vorwärts und 2 Schritte zurück. Ich sage 3 Schritte vorwärts und 6 Schritte zurück. Ich sage 4 Schritte vorwärts und 1 Schritt zurück. Ich sage einen halben vorwärts und einen halben zurück. Liederbuch. Sage 1 Schritt vor und dann 2 Schritt zurück. Sage 2 Schritt vor und dann 6 Schritt zurück. Sage 4 Schritt vor und dann 1 Schritt zurück. Sage halben Schritt vor und einen halben Schritt zurück. Sage linke Seite vor und dann rechte Seite zurück. Haut's mir in die linke Seite, geht's da rechts wieder zurück. Mit der halben Revolution plant's alle große Sache. Ist ja nur eine halbe Lösung für eine riesen Laufmasche. Sag ich, Girl mögen Reggae und der Girl in Bewegung. Und der Boy mag der Reggae und der kann er nicht faken. Die kommen heute zusammen mit die Floor und die Moves. Und der Ruhe ist im Raum, alle schauen's nur zu. Das Essen hiegstört und der krasse MC, super geile, schöne Frau, ganz in grün ist sie. Sie hat den Nägel frei. Schaust du hier, wie ihre Haare stehen? So eine krasse, kleine Frau, wie hast du je gesehen? Sag ich 1 Schritt vor und 2 Schritt zurück. Sag ich 3 Schritt vor und 6 Schritt zurück. sage ich 4 Schritte vor und einen Schritt zurück, sage ich einen halben Schritt vor und einen halben Schritt zurück. Sage ich, Hitzen kommt der Hass von dem Boden bis auf. Schwarzer Rauch kommt da auf. Niemand passt auf. Die Musiker tun jammen und die Typen reden mit den Kippen, fliegen reden wie die Fledermäuse von den Lippen. Und die Girls tun tanzen und die Buben tun wippen, trinken Sex, Culpa Libre und die Boxen umkippen. Und dunkel ist der Raum und es kommt dunkel runter, unter. Und da rufen Stimmen, alle müssen raus aus der Hütten. Rufen Stimmen, alle müssen raus aus der Hütten. Und von da beginnt der Schreien und die Stimmen rufen lauter. Sag ich, schreien's alle jetzt und die Stimmen immer mehr. Bedecken all Mund, an Kopf, Unterkommen. Sag ich 2 Schritt vor und 2 Schritt zurück. Sag ich 3 Schritt vor und 6 Schritt zurück. Sag ich 4 Schritt vor und 1 Schritt zurück. Sag ich einen halben Schritt vor und einen halben Schritt zurück. Auf der Straße unten liegt einer mit dem Gesicht nach unten und ein Kind fliegt durch die Luft. Das wird am Boden gefunden. Flammen gehen hoch und da wird es alles rot. Bub fällt von der Fenster und man sieht schon, der ist tot. Gell fällt nach innen und da keiner sieht's mehr. Und im 3. Balkon steht nix ein grüner Meer da. Kommt die Polizei dann und die Feuerwehr auch, sind voll geschreckt, wissen auch nicht, was da. Da ruft eine Mama und da hat sie keine Schuhe. Und ein Mann schaut dazu, aber tut nichts tun. Und die Freunde sind geschockt von einem riesigen Verlust. Der Rauch geht hoch, dick unten in New Cross. Sag ich, hoch und dick steigt der Rauch im Haus in New Cross. Sag ich, dick und hoch steigt der Rauch im Haus in New Cross. Sag ich, Blut, muss da rennen, tut so weh der Verlust. Sag ich, schwarzer Rauch aufsteigt vom Haus in New Cross. Sag ich, linke Seite vor und der rechte Seite zurück. Haut's mir in die linke Seite, geht's rechts wieder zurück. Mit der halben Revolution, mit dem Plan für eine Attacke, ist eine halbe Lösung für eine große, dampfende Kacke. Sag ich 2 Schritte vor und 2 Schritte zurück. Sag ich 3 Schritte vor und 6 Schritte zurück. Sag ich 4 Schritte vor und 1 Schritt zurück. Sag ich einen halben Schritt vor und einen halben Schritt zurück.
This one was Michael? Or you can take this. I just put it in for you. Thank you. Okay, you're welcome. Okay, well, I think you just witnessed possible solutions to impossible tasks. First impossible task, translating the poems from Search, especially Songbook. And Anne Cotton added to her translation of Songbook a comment, which I'd like to share at least some parts of it with you. And she began, I don't want just to pass on my worries, but to be quite honest, I'm thinking that perhaps Songbook should or cannot really be translated, not into German at least. But I have tried in 2 different tactics, and I can add more to that. And the second impossible task was just taken over by Julia Malik, namely performing the poems from Search. So this is really, really tough. And I mean, what do you think? Is it actually an impossibility translating? You mentioned your Search was, or Songbook was translated into Catalan and Russian, but some of us do need the translation.
Yeah, of course. That's why I enjoy it so much, because it's Jamaican English, and I think actually a lot of people are quite like in some ways familiar with it if you ever listen to reggae or ska or even like more modern stuff. You kind of, I think there are certain words that have like really passed into English, but this was really coming from the kind of English that I grew up with, Jamaican English I grew up with, the kind of like tones and rhythms that I grew up with. Like I said at the beginning, it's like partly a nursery rhyme kind of thing and partly a freestyle, because it's the rhythm that my dad always used to use when he was just toasting, which is when you just talk on the microphone. At an event or something, or at a party, he'd just be like, la, 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 la. And it's just a way of being able to freestyle really easily because you know what the rhythm is. So yeah, like combining all of these things, and then I think to put it in different contexts every single time, and to hear how people do it. Like the Catalan translation was amazing because all these kids came running out of the building, and I was like, "What is he saying?" It's like the Pied Piper. You know, like, this is a sad poem.
Yeah. But I mean, it was more or less the same here, didn't you notice it? Because it's the Austrian dialect, or the southern German dialect, which Anne used, and which is quite similar to what you said about the acoustic impression of your father. She wrote, "My attempt to fit the rhythm and supply and in some way German text to fit to the music, led me to use a kind of hybrid dialect as might be used by a worker who has spent time in various areas of southern Germany and Austria, where I am from." Yeah? In moments, this feels like it punctually works to create immediacy, while at the same time creating distance, giving a space for realization and commemoration. I think she describes quite well what it does with one.
Yeah, and I absolutely love that, and I sort of maybe, you know, in a way enjoy the difficulty of it. I think it's very fruitful, because each time something different comes out. And I love that it's this kind of like living memorial, right. You know, like actually I got that impression that it was somebody saying the story, but saying it in a different way. And actually in 1981, when the fire happened, people like all over the world heard about it. It wasn't, not initially. Once the people protested and made it a big deal, they did. And you know, people all over the world saw what the injustice that it was, and it was the same thing with Grenfell. In 2017, people all over the world saw what was happening. It was very clear, and people wrote about it. Newspapers reported on it, like everywhere. So actually, to be able to say that actually this story continues, and that the essence of the story can be translated into like a southern German dialect, into a Catalan, and that little bit continues. I think to be able to give that as a kind of living memorial is, it's very important.
Okay, yeah, the way you say it, the living memorial, I think that's what is tackled by this challenge of translation also, because, and Cotton writes, it's also the difficulty to find a respectful way to translate and to show respect also. And what you say, conveying the essence. I mean, if I would go into an archive, I would not come back with poetry, but obviously not. I'm not a writer, but you did. So, and this is what can poetry do? Perhaps do even better, and in the multifaceted tones you're using than historiography could, like. Passing something on to the collective memory. Why did it have to be poems? Although I'm the most happy person in the world that it's poems in the end.
That was in the contract, okay. Actually. They were like... they were like, poetry, you don't get paid.
That was the best contract ever.
It really was. It was a great contract. But no, it was because I think they commissioned. So actually, these poems all started out as just 10, and some of those 10 didn't make it. But it started out as just like 10 poems that were commissioned to commemorate the 50th anniversary of the George Padmore Institute, which is the archive that I was working in. And the George Padmore Institute was set up by a number of people, but most notably John LaRose, who, and his wife Sarah, who sadly died last year, actually. And the whole point of it was to document all of this stuff that had happened. So it's not just the New Cross fire, it's Carnival, what was going on with Carnival, it's the Black Parents movement, it's the Sunday school movement, it's all the student movements that were happening in the 60s when loads of Caribbean students were coming to London and forming their own societies. So it's an extremely rich thing. And the point was to not only to tell this story, but to to celebrate, in fact, the fact that this stuff has been passed down to me. And I feel incredibly lucky to have received it. And I don't know if I want to compare poetry with other forms necessarily, but I do think that, you talked about respect, and I think there's something really important, not just about respect, but also play when it comes to this stuff. I think it's really easy to fall into a tone of reverence, and we put it in a little box and it stays over there. And actually, it felt strange to me even at the time, but to take something and be like, okay, can we take this somewhere else? Can we do something else with it? Can we rewrite it, rewrite this history for the present day? Can we put it in other people's mouths? Can we give it a different voice? And I don't know what the answer is. And that's part of the risk, I think, but it's also the kind of the pleasure and the joy and the privilege.
Right, okay. Because you mentioned the risk and the play, could we also call that dub poetry? Is it the dub?
Fully.
Because you're taking materials and amplifying them and using various forms and other voices with it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's like a plate, right?
Yeah, right.
The archive is the plate, and then you can bring it and bring your own sounds and speak over it if you want to. You can do a rewind. You can start from the top, and you know what I mean. You can do all kinds of things with this stuff, and that's really what my practice is about. I think as a poet, I think that's the joy and the pleasure. It's risky in that you're dealing with history in some ways, and you're actually dealing in some ways with other people's lives, even though all of these people are dead. Nonetheless, you've still got a kind of almost the same line that we were treading with the translator. You've got to be like, how do I translate this into something else, and blah, blah, and who am I to be speaking it, blah, 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 all these questions. But nonetheless, I think dub is a really good comparison, because that's also the thing people are doing, and it's understood and recognized as an art form. You can take someone's song, and you can be like, I'm going to remix this. Yeah.
Please do take the risk more often if something like such turns out. And would you please, because I asked everybody, tell us what do we see? What are you looking out to when you look out your window?
So this is I don't know if you have the equivalent here in Germany, but we have this hotel chain in Britain called Premier Inn.
Some people seem to know it's something like Ibis, no?
Yeah,
or
maybe
below.
Worse.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
So yeah, it was really funny when I got the request to send a picture of my writing space, because I was like, I'm in this really depressing Premier Inn, alone, eating takeaway. And I thought I'd share that with you, yeah. Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Thank you, Jay Bernard.
Thank you.
Paul Muldoon was born into a Catholic family in Northern Ireland. He grew up on a farm in County Armagh, near the boundary with Northern Ireland. At St. Patrick's College, he learned Gaelic and studied Irish literature, and if I'm not mistaken, he wrote his first poems in Gaelic. He worked at the BBC in Belfast, and in 1987, he moved to the United States. He taught first at Columbia University, later at Princeton, where he's now a professor in the humanities and founding chair of the Peter B. Lewis Center for the Arts. And he also was a professor of poetry at the University of Oxford. He published his first volume of poetry, New Weather, at the age of 19, and since then he has published more than a dozen books of poetry, awarded with the Pulitzer Prize and many more. The most recent ones are Howdy Scalp and Frolic and Detour. And in addition to his poetic and academic work, Paul is a translator, a librettist, a musician, and a songwriter. And I suppose a collection of essays will probably be out next year, is that right? Yep. He just finished and also staged a rock musical, Athens, Georgia, an adaptation of The Frogs of Aristophanes. And he also writes song lyrics for various bands, some of which he plays in himself. For instance, Rogue Oliphant, specializing in spoken word pieces. And he's also the editor of the recently released Paul McCartney two-volume set, The Lyrics, 1956 to the Present, which illuminates the stories behind the McCartney song lyrics. In German, Paul McCartney, Lyrics 1956 bis heute, translated by Conny Lösch. By the way, tomorrow on Saturday at 4 p.m., 16 Uhr, Paul will talk with Christine Watty about his collaboration with Paul McCartney here im Haus der Berliner Festspiele. Paul's poems, as you will hear, they are erudite poems, but not educationally whimsical ones. They feature subtle mythological references and multiple allusions to literature, to music, to the visual arts, but they are never hermetic. With their richness of images, their richness of language, of sounds, they also function in a very immediate way, as you will hear. Like many cosmopolitans and emigres, Paul has a very particular sensitivity to language. And for instance, the hedgehog poem he's going to read, you can either listen to it as a parable on poetry or a mythological history of all wars, or just as a wonderful poem on a hedgehog. But if you expect Paul's poems to provide answers, you will be proven wrong here. Rather, it seems that he knows how to ask the right questions in his poetry. Although the troubles and the conflict in Northern Ireland always find their way into many of Paul's poems, he's not a political writer in the strict sense. His poetry is rather sightseeing, taking you places or other times. And what he does is laying open various layers of history or giving you a glimpse of what is behind, what is apparent to eyesight. In 1998 appeared the bilingual edition auf schmalen Pfaden durch den tiefen Norden, ausgewählte Gedichte in Edition Akzente Hansa, edited by Michael Krüger. Can we have Paul's photo? Yeah, because you see it here behind me, not so small in my hand. And the 7 poems he will read tonight are taken from that volume. They were originally published in English between 1973 and 1990, and the German translation is by Margaret Atwood and Hans Christian Oeser. And they will be read by Frank Arnold. Paul, Muldoon, and Frank, please join me on the stage.
Anne Shaw. When the master was calling the roll at the primary school in College Lands, you were meant to call back Anne Shaw and raise your hand as your name occurred. Anne Shaw meaning here and now, all present and correct, was the first word of Irish I spoke. The last name on the ledger belonged to Joseph Mary Plunkett Ward and was followed, as often as not, by silence, knowing looks, a nod and a wink, the master's droll, and where's our little ward of court? I remember the first time he came back. The master had sent him out along the hedges to weigh up for himself and cut a stick with which he would be beaten. After a while, nothing was spoken. He would arrive as a matter of course with an ash plant, a sally rod, or finally the hazel wand he had whittled down to a whip lash. Its twist of red and yellow lacquers, sanded and polished, and altogether so delicately wrought that he had engraved his initials on it. I last met Joseph Mary Plunkett Ward in a pub just over the Irish border. He was living in the open, in a secret camp on the other side of the mountain. He was fighting for Ireland, making things happen. And he told me, Joe Ward, of how he had risen through the ranks to quartermaster, commandant, how every morning at parade, his volunteers would call back Anshaw and raise their hands as their names occurred.
Anshaw. Wenn der Lehrer die Namen verlas in der Volksschule von College Lands, musste man laut Anshaw rufen und mit der Hand aufzeigen, sobald der eigene Name fiel. Anshaw, Bedeutung hier, hier und jetzt, vollzählig angetreten, war das erste Wort auf Irisch, das ich sprach. Der letzte Name im Klassenbuch gehörte Joseph Mary Plunkett Ward. Auf ihn folgten fast immer Schweigen, wissende Blicke, Nicken, Zwinkern, des Lehrers drolliges „Und wo steckt unser kleines Mündel Ward?" Ich weiß noch, wie er das erste Mal zurückkam. Der Lehrer hatte ihn hinausgeschickt zu den Hecken, sich einen Stock zu suchen und abzuschneiden, mit dem er ihn prügeln konnte. Nach einer Weile, es fiel kein Wort, kam er wie selbstverständlich mit einem Eschensetzling, einer Weidenrute und schließlich mit einem Haselstecken zu einer Peitschenschnur zurechtgeschnitzt, die Krümmung rot und gelb lackiert, geschmirgelt und poliert und insgesamt so kunstvoll angefertigt, dass er seine Initialen eingeritzt. Zuletzt begegnete ich Joseph Mary Plunkett Ward in einem Pub jenseits der irischen Grenze. Er lebte unter freiem Himmel in einem geheimen Lager auf der anderen Seite des Berges. Er kämpfte für Irland und sorgte für Aktion. Und er erzählte mir davon, wie er, Joe Ward, sich hochgedient zum Quartiermeister, zum Kommandanten, wie jeden Morgen beim Appell seine Freiwilligen laut Anshaw riefen und mit der Hand aufzeigten, sobald ihr Name fiel.
Thank you so much. It's such a delight to be here. What a joy to share the stage with such a great group of poets. The night is moving along. So I may cut my reading a little bit, actually, because I'm sure you have many other things. Well, we'll see. Let's see how we get on. This is one of the very first poems I wrote, and it has to do with a hedgehog, which used to come round to our back door when I was a kid in County Armagh, halfway across Northern Ireland. And we'd leave out a little saucer of milk for it to drink, which I'm told is a really bad idea. Actually, it's not what you should be feeding hedgehogs. But in any case, we'd hear the little saucer rattle when the hedgehog was lapping up the milk, and we'd open the door, and he'd be gone. Or he, she, or perhaps they were gone. And so there's a poem trying to make sense of that, as so many poems, of course, are trying to make sense of something. Hedgehog. By the way, I mentioned a hovercraft. You know, one of the dangers of being off the moment in the poetry business is that the moment passes. And as one or two, if you will recall, the hovercraft, which seemed like the way of the future, right? We might go to Mars in it, somehow has disappeared, but in any case. Hedgehog. The snail moves like a hovercraft, held up by a rubber cushion of itself, sharing its secret with the hedgehog. The hedgehog shares its secret with no one. We say, hedgehog, come out of yourself, and we will love you. We mean no harm. We want only to listen to what you have to say. We want your answers to our questions. The hedgehog gives nothing away, keeping itself to itself. We wonder what a hedgehog has to hide, why it so distrusts. We forget the God under this crown of thorns. We forget that never again will a God trust in the world.
Igel. Die Schnecke bewegt sich wie ein Hovercraft, von einem Gummikissen ihrer selbst getragen und teilt ihr Geheimnis mit dem Igel. Der Igel teilt sein Geheimnis mit niemandem. Wir sagen, Igel, komm aus dir raus und wir werden dich lieben. Wir wollen nichts Böses. Wir wollen nur hören, was du zu sagen hast. Wir wollen deine Antworten auf unsere Fragen. Der Igel verrät nichts. Er behält es für sich. Wir fragen uns, was ein Igel zu verbergen hat, warum er so misstraut. Wir vergessen den Gott unter dieser Dornenkrone. Wir vergessen, dass nie wieder ein Gott der Welt vertrauen wird.
Thank you. Thank you so much for reading these poems. You have to be around 18 to write a poem like that. You have to have the nerve that an 18-year-old has to do it. As you can see from that poem, perhaps, I was fascinated as a teenager, and since then with the methods of the metaphysical poets, the great 17th century English poets, John Donne and his ilk, who specialized in taking two very separate ideas and jamming them together. And this next poem is in that vein, I suppose, also. It's a poem about the Cuban Missile Crisis. You know, and for years, of course, that has seemed like something that was way back in some past, but I guess there are days in which it might seem to belong to our future, alas. There was a sense, of course, that the end of the world was at hand. And I was brought up as a Catholic, as we heard. So what happened to me and my friends was that we were sent to confession. Even though none of us had really done too much as yet. Anyway, so this is a poem that sets the story of a young woman going to confession against the what's happening on the larger stage. Or is it Cuba? My eldest sister arrived home that morning in her white muslin evening dress. Who the hell do you think you are, running out to dances and next to nothing, as though we hadn't enough bother with the world at war, if not at an end? My father was pounding the breakfast table. Those Yankees were touch and go as it was, if you'd heard Patton in Armagh. But this Kennedy's nearly an Irishman, so he's not much better than ourselves. And him with only to say the word. If you've got anything on your mind, maybe you should make your peace with God. I could hear May from beyond the curtain. Bless me, Father, for I have sinned. I told a lie once. I was disobedient once. And Father, a boy touched me once. Tell me, child, was this touch immodest? Did he touch your breast, for example? He brushed against me, Father, very gently.
Kuba. Meine älteste Schwester kam an dem Morgen in ihrem weißen Baumwollkleid nach Hause. Verdammt, was glaubst du eigentlich, wer du bist? Rennst mit so gut wie nichts am Leib zum Tanzen? Als ob wir nicht schon genug um die Ohren hätten. Die Welt im Krieg, wenn nicht gar am Ende. Mein Vater schlug mit der Faust auf den Frühstückstisch. Diese Yankees standen so schon auf Messers Schneide. Ihr hättet mal Patton in Armagh hören sollen. Aber dieser Kennedy ist ja fast ein Ire, also ist er auch nicht viel besser als wir. Und wo ein einziges Wort von ihm genügt, wenn du was auf dem Herzen hast, dann mach besser deinen Frieden mit Gott. Ich konnte May hinter dem Vorhang hören. In Demut und Reue bekenne ich meine Sünden. Ich habe einmal gelogen, einmal nicht gehorcht. Und, Vater, einmal hat mich ein Junge berührt. Sag mir, Kind, war die Berührung schamlos? Hat er zum Beispiel deine Brust berührt? Er hat mich gestreift, Vater, ganz sacht.
This next one is about a roundabout, the very first roundabout in Ireland. It's admittedly it's not a huge topic for poetry, but someone has to do it. And I stepped up there, needless to say. I must have had nothing else to do at the time. But in any case, when this roundabout was built in the early 1960s, we, of course, had absolutely no idea of what a roundabout did. We'd heard stories about it from our neighbours who were working on it. We kind of got the idea, we grasped the principle up to a point, but we had to experience it for ourselves. A few allusions: the B Specials, the auxiliary force of the Royal Ulster Constabulary. a force that was defunded in the early 1970s because even by Northern Irish standards, they'd sort of overstepped the mark, as it were. What else? The sash is the sash my father wore, the Great Orange Song. The Pope, you're familiar with. The sightseers. My father and mother, my brother and sister, and I, with Uncle Pat, our dour, best loved uncle, had set out that Sunday afternoon in July in his broken down Ford, not to visit some graveyard. One died of shingles, one of fever, another's knees turned to jelly. But the brand new roundabout at Ballygolly, the first in mid-Ulster. Uncle Pat was telling us how the B specials had stopped him one night somewhere near Ballygolly and smashed his bicycle and made him sing the sash and curse the Pope of Rome. They held a pistol so hard against his forehead, there was still the mark of an O when he got home.
Die Touristen. Mein Vater und meine Mutter, mein Bruder, meine Schwester und ich waren mit Onkel Pat, unserem mürrischen, geliebten Onkel, an dem Sonntagnachmittag im Juli in seinem kaputten Ford aufgebrochen, nicht um irgendeinen Friedhof zu besuchen. Einer starb an Gürtelrose, einer an Fieber, die Knie eines anderen waren zu Watte geworden, sondern den nagelneuen Kreisel in Ballygolly, den ersten in Zentralulster. Onkel Pat erzählte uns, wie die Miliz, die B-Specials, ihn eines Abends irgendwo in der Nähe von Ballygolly anhielten und sein Fahrrad zertrümmerten und ihn zwangen, den Sash zu singen und den Papst in Rom zu verfluchen. Sie hielten ihm die Pistole so hart gegen die Stirn, dass er das Zeichen eines O noch trug, als er nach Hause kam.
We'll read just two more. This first one's called Cauliflowers. Some of you may be familiar with Mark Twain's description of a cauliflower as a cabbage with a college degree. And my father, among other distinctions, was a cauliflower grower. That's what he did. Again, somebody had to do it, and he did it. The great preparation for the life of a poet, I can tell you. Anyway, so this is a poem that describes some aspects of cauliflower growing. It started with a piece, we were hearing earlier on how poems may begin from the most unlikely of spots. This one began with a piece in the National Enquirer, with which one or two of you may be familiar. It's one of those organs, I think is the only word for it, which has front page stories like, "Man gives birth to himself," which almost everything on the front page is a poem in the offing. Anyway, this one had to do with, it said, plants that glow in the dark have been developed through gene splicing. This is all kosher, by the way. This is all absolutely possible, and actually more and more likely, in which light-producing bacteria from the mouths of fish are introduced to cabbage, carrots, and potatoes. And needless to say, I thought, what about cauliflowers? More often than not, he stops at the head rig to light his pipe and try to regain his composure. The price of cauliflowers has gone down 2 weeks in a row on the Belfast market. From here, we can just make out a platoon of light infantry going down the road to the accompaniment of a pipe band. The sun glints on their silver-buttoned jerkins. My uncle, Patrick Regan, whom you know, had been leaning against the mudguard of the lorry. He levers open the bonnet and tinkers with a light wrench at the hose pipe that's always going down. Then he himself goes down to bleed oil into a jerry can. My father slips the pipe into his scorch-marked breast pocket and again makes light of the trepanned cauliflowers. All this as I listen to lovers repeatedly going down on each other in the next room, light of my life, in a motel in Oregon. All this, Magritte's pipe and the pipe bomb. White Annette's gillyflowers. Margaret, are you grieving? My father going down the primrose path with Patrick Regan. All gone out of the world of light. All gone down the original pipe. And the cauliflowers in an unmarked pit that were harvested by their own light.
Blumenkohl. Durch Genmanipulation wurden Pflanzen entwickelt, die im Dunkeln leuchten. Dazu verpflanzte man die lichtproduzierenden Bakterien aus dem Maul von Fischen in Kohl, Möhren und Kartoffeln. The National Enquirer. Häufig hält er am Feldrain im letzten Licht, um seine Pfeife anzuzünden und noch einmal um Fassung zu ringen. Der Preis von Blumenkohl auf dem Markt in Belfast sinkt nun schon 2 Wochen lang. Wenn unser Blick von hier aus sinkt, können wir im Sonnenlicht die Infanterie ausmachen, die die Straße mit einem Musikchor, komplett mit Pfeifen und Trompeten entlang marschiert. Es funkeln die Silberknöpfe ihrer Westen. Mein Onkel Patrick Regan steht schon eine ganze Weile gegen den Kotflügel des Lasters gelehnt. Er stemmt nun die Kühlerhaube auf und pfeift sich eins, während er mit einem Schraubenschlüssel Licht in das Schlauchgewirr bringt, das immer wieder wegsinkt. Dann lässt er sich selber sinken, um Öl in einen Armeekanister laufen zu lassen. Mein Vater lässt die Pfeife in seine angesenkte Brusttasche gleiten und wirft ein neues Licht auf den trepanierten Blumenkohl. Das alles, während ich zuhörte, wie Liebende nebenan schon wieder aufeinander niedersinken. O Licht meines Lebens in einem Motel in Oregon. Das alles. Margrette's Pfeife und das Pfeifen einer Bombe, weiße Annetten, Sonnenblumen. Margaret, trauerst du? Mein Vater versinkt in Primeln, unterwegs mit Patrick Regan. Alle sind verschwunden aus der Welt des Lichts. Alles versunken. Man kann darauf pfeifen. Und der Blumenkohl in einer unmarkierten Grube, geerntet im eigenen Licht.
Thank you so much for your patience, and good humor. Way past my bedtime for sure. So, this one is set during the first Christmas, at the first Christmas of the Great War, the First World War. And it's a description of what happened then. I'm sure many of you, most of you perhaps, are more familiar with it than I am. I was quite disappointed when I've seen films, I've seen, I think there's a musical actually based on this episode. I'd always assumed that those were based on this poem, but maybe not. In any case, truce. It begins with 1 or 2 soldiers and 1 or 2 following, with hampers over their shoulders. They might be off wildfowling as they would another Christmas day. So gingerly they pick their steps. No one seems sure of what to do. All stop when one stops. A fire gets lit. Some spread their greatcoats on the frozen ground. Polish vodka, fruit, and bread are broken out and passed round. The air of an old German song, the rules of patience, are the secrets they'll share before long. They draw on their last cigarettes as Friday night lovers, when it's over, might get up from their mattresses to congratulate each other and exchange names and addresses.
Waffenruhe. Mit 1, 2 Lanzern fängt es an und 1, 2 andere tun es ihnen nach, über den Schultern Körbe tragend, als machten sie auf Wildentenjagd wie an anderen Weihnachtstagen auch, bahnen behutsam sie sich ihren Weg. Keiner scheint zu wissen, was zu tun ist. Wenn einer anhält, tun es alle. Ein Feuer wird entfacht. Manche breiten ihren Mantel auf dem festgefrorenen Boden aus. Polnischer Wodka, Obst und Brote werden ausgepackt und dargereicht. Ein altes deutsches Volkslied. Die Regeln der Passions sind die Geheimnisse, die sie bald teilen werden. Sie ziehen an ihren letzten Zigaretten, wie Liebende Freitagnachts danach von ihrem Lager sich erheben, einander zu beglückwünschen und Namen und Adressen auszutauschen.
Thank you.
Paul.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Paul. And since we're past your bedtime, as you just said, you'll just get 1.5 questions.
Excellent. I'm going to give you 1.5 answers.
Hopefully to the same 1.5 questions.
Right.
Okay. Because as I said, you don't write political poetry, as I think. Your poems do have a double perspective. They are at first sight biographical or anecdotal, I don't know if you call it like this, and they have a historical background, and they are in a way like a tipping figure. And I have the impression, rereading your poetry, that today the political dimension is tipping to the front, which would be the case with poems such as Cuba or Truce, where private and public history, small and big history, are linked to one another, and now the political one is coming to the foreground. Do you have the same impression, or is it?
Well,
Just using
thank you very much. The poems that I was reading are from
Yeah.
quite a bit ago. You know, I think all poems are political. Whether or not they're party political, of course, is another matter. And as someone who spent the first 35 years of my life in Northern Ireland, I think I was very conscious of, as we're conscious in most circumstances, of the complexity of the situation there. And I think, like many of the other poets from that part of the world, I was very reluctant to come out and, make a policy statement or present a position paper. And sometimes, but the poems themselves present positions, so that there are political positions represented, sometimes contradictory ones, in the poems. Funnily enough, since I moved to America 35 years ago now, I think it's fair to say, but not from these poems, that actually many of the pieces I've written in those 35 years have become much more politically engaged, which might seem odd, but in a strange way, I think there's something particularly naked about the American experience that demands that as a citizen, never mind as a writer, that one gets involved more evidently.
I don't want to make a 2.5 question,
No,
sorry.
don't.
No, I won't,
Yeah.
I won't. So the half question would be, is the hedgehog, in a way, the heraldic animal or a figure form of the poem or your poem?
A figure of what?
A figure form of the
A figure
poem.
form, yes.
Yeah.
The poem is, in many ways, a self-contained object, and that, of course, as we know, is the one great truth that the hedgehog knows. However, nothing exists by itself in the world. So the hedgehog is probably mistaken about its sense of itself, and it does not exist alone, and nor do poems. Poems are products of their moments. They're products of the personalities through whom they were written, and they are inevitably representative of what is going on in the worlds in which they're written.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you
And,
very much.
yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you,
All
folks.
right. Well, that was Poetry Night, slightly behind schedule. Thank you so much. In case you would like to know where the beautiful desk and the beautiful oleander, hydrangea is the name, right? Where it is, ask Paul outside. You will have the opportunity of getting your book signed in the foyer. I have to remind you of the beautiful Dussmann bookstore in the foyer as well. You can get your book signed and ask all the questions we were not able to ask. Thank you so much for your patience, for your Sitzfleisch, and once again, thank you to Margaret Atwood, who had to go to the hotel after 2 hard days again. Thank you, Charis Vlavianos. Thank you, Jay Bernard. Thank you, Paul Muldoon. Thank you. Thank you, Julia Malik. Thank you, Frank Arnold. Thank you for entrusting me with this beautiful task. Take care, have a good journey home, and see you next Poetry Night. Good night, everybody.